December 3rd, 1944. 0600 hours, near Nancy, France. Sergeant William Hanley stood beside his Sherman in the pre-dawn cold, watching smoke rise from the wreckage 200 yards ahead. The German shell had punched clean through the turret. 5 men gone before breakfast. His crew was next in the column. Around him, other tankers prepared their Shermans in silence. They checked ammunition. They warmed engines. They did not talk about the math. 12 tanks lost in 4 days. 60 men. The German 88mm guns and Panzerfausts didn't miss at this range. And the Sherman's armour, barely 2 inches on the front hull, wasn't built to stop them. Hanley looked at the pile of sandbags stacked near the engineer's tent. Dense, heavy, plentiful. Then he looked back at his tank. Orders said modifications were unauthorized. Regulations said extra weight would damage the suspension. Command said the Sherman didn't need help, but orders didn't stop the shells. And Hanley wasn't interested in regulations anymore. He grabbed a rope and walked toward the sandbags. What he built in the next 6 hours would break every rule and save his crew's life. William Hanley was not a career soldier. He was a machinist from Pittsburgh who'd worked in a steel mill before the draft notice came in 1943. He knew metal. He knew tolerances and stress points and how things broke under pressure. The army put him in tanks because he could fix engines and because he didn't panic when something caught fire. By December 1944, Sergeant Hanley commanded a Sherman M4A3 in the 37th Tank Battalion, part of the 4th Armoured Division. His crew was 5 men, a driver, a bow gunner, a loader, a gunner, and himself in the commander's seat. They'd been together since October, long enough to trust each other, not long enough to stop learning each other's real names. The Sherman was America's workhorse, reliable, mass-produced, simple enough that a crew could field strip the engine in an afternoon and have it running by nightfall. It had a 75mm main gun that could kill German tanks if you hit them right. It had a Ford GAAV-8 engine that could push 30 tons across any terrain Europe offered. But it was not built to fight German armour head-on. The front hull armour was 2 inches thick. The turret was 3. German Panther tanks had 4.5 inches sloped at angles that deflected American shells like rain off a roof. The German 88mm anti-tank gun could penetrate a Sherman from 1,000 yards. The Panzerfaust, a disposable rocket launcher carried by German infantry, could punch through at 100. American tankers had a saying, 5 Shermans to kill 1 Panther. The joke was that it took 5 tanks because the first 4 had to die to get the 5th one close enough for a kill shot. By winter, nobody was laughing. The Allied advance through France had slowed to a crawl. Patton's Third Army, famous for racing across open country in August, was now grinding through frozen mud and fortified towns. The Germans had retreated to defensive positions along rivers and ridge lines. They were outnumbered. They were low on fuel, but they still had better tanks and better guns, and they knew how to use them. Every day brought the same rhythm. American infantry would push forward into a village or tree line. German gunners would wait until the Shermans rolled up in support. Then they'd open fire. 1 shot, 1 kill. The Shermans would return fire, but by then the German gun had already displaced, or the crew had vanished into a cellar or bunker. Hanley's battalion lost tanks faster than they could be replaced. New Shermans arrived from the rear every week, fresh from the factory, still smelling of paint and Cosmoline. New crews arrived with them, boys from Ohio and Texas and California, who'd trained on tanks for 6 weeks and never seen combat. Most of them lasted less than a month. The veterans developed superstitions. Some crews painted lucky symbols on their turrets. Some refused to name their tanks because naming them felt like a curse. Some prayed. Some didn't. Hanley's crew didn't talk about it. They just worked. Every morning they checked the engine, they cleaned the gun, they redistributed ammunition so the hull wouldn't brew up as fast if they took a hit. They moved extra rations into the turret so they wouldn't have to open the hatches as often. They did everything they could think of to improve their odds, but none of it changed the fundamental problem. The Sherman could move, it could shoot, it could maneuver and support infantry and hold ground, but it could not stop German shells, and that meant every engagement was a question of luck and geometry. If the German gunner missed, you lived. If he didn't, you burned. Hanley stood in the cold that December morning, watching the smoke from the destroyed tank drift across the frozen field. He thought about his crew. He thought about the next advance. He thought about the shells that were coming. The Sherman could fight, but it couldn't live long enough to win. The losses came in patterns. Morning. A Sherman would advance through a gap in the trees. The German gunner would wait until the tank was committed, unable to reverse quickly. One shot, turret penetration, fire, afternoon. A different crew, a different road, but the same result. The Panzerfaust team hidden in a farmhouse cellar would wait until the tank rolled past. 50 yards, point-blank range, rear armor hit, ammunition detonates, crew gone. Evening, replacements arrive, new faces, new names. By morning, some of them would be gone too. The tank advances, shell hits, another crew gone. The mathematics were brutal. The 4th Armoured Division started the campaign across France with over 200 tanks. By December, they'd lost more than half, some to mechanical failure, some to mines, most to German anti-tank weapons. The Germans had options. The Panzerfaust was cheap, simple and devastating at close range. Any infantryman could carry one. Any basement or hedgerow could hide a team. The Panzerschreck was heavier, reloadable, effective out to 200 yards. And the 88mm anti-tank gun, originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, could kill a Sherman from over a kilometre away before the crew even knew they were being engaged. Against all of this, the Sherman had speed and numbers. Speed didn't matter when you were stuck on narrow roads between frozen fields. Numbers didn't matter when you lost 5 tanks for every one you destroyed. Hanley watched the casualty reports pile up. December 1st, 3 tanks lost, 1 damaged. December 2nd, 4 tanks lost, 2 damaged. December 3rd, 5 tanks lost before noon. Crews started showing signs of strain, loaders' hands shaking when loading shells, drivers hesitating before advancing into open ground, gunners flinching at every distant crack of artillery. Nobody blamed them. The tankers knew the odds. They knew what happened when a Sherman took a penetrating hit. The shell would punch through the armour and detonate inside the crew compartment. If you were lucky, the explosion killed you instantly. If you weren't, the ammunition cooked off, and you had maybe 10 seconds to bail out through hatches that were too small and too slow while fire filled the turret. Hanley had pulled one man out of a burning Sherman in November. The driver had made it halfway through his hatch before the flames got him. Hanley still heard the screaming sometimes when he tried to sleep. The crews adapted however they could. Some stored fewer rounds inside the hull to reduce the chance of ammunition fires. Some welded extra handles onto the outside of the turret so they could climb out faster. Some kept the hatches open during combat, despite the risk of grenade or small arms fire. None of it was enough. Command offered reassurances. Officers from division headquarters visited the front and told the crews that new tanks were coming. Better tanks. Shermans with thicker armour and bigger guns. Just hold on a few more weeks. Just keep advancing. Just keep fighting. The crews nodded and said nothing, but they knew the truth. The better tanks weren't coming fast enough, and even if they did, there weren't enough of them. The Sherman M4A3 was what they had. It was what they'd keep having. so either they found a way to make it survivable or they kept dying. Hanley raised the issue with his company commander, a captain from Baltimore who'd been in France since June. "Sir, we need more armour." The captain looked tired. "I've put in the request, Sergeant." "Division says the Shermans don't need modification." "With respect, sir, Division isn't sitting in these tanks." The captain nodded slowly. "I know, but orders are orders. No unauthorized modifications. Too much weight damages the suspension, makes the tank slower, easier to target." Hanley stared at him. "Slower than dead?" The captain didn't answer. Orders didn't stop the shells, so the men stopped listening. Hanley couldn't sleep after the morning briefing. They were ordered to advance at 0800. Same road, same open ground, same German gun positions that had killed 3 tanks the day before. Division believed the Germans had withdrawn during the night. Hanley didn't believe it. He walked the bivouac area as dawn broke, boots crunching through frost, breath visible in the cold air. Other crews were waking up, starting engines, heating rations over exhaust manifolds. The normal pre-combat routine that felt anything but normal. Near the engineer depot, Hanley stopped. Stacked against a supply truck were hundreds of sandbags, heavy canvas bags filled with earth and gravel, used by the engineers to reinforce positions and shore up collapsing buildings. Each bag weighed maybe 50 pounds when full. Dense, solid, packed tight. Hanley stared at them. He thought about the German shells punching through 2 inches of steel armour. He thought about the physics of it, velocity, mass, penetration. He thought about the steel mill back in Pittsburgh, how they'd tested metal strength by measuring how much force it took to deform or fracture it. Steel stopped shells by being hard and thick. But what if you didn't need more steel? What if you just needed more mass? Sand wouldn't stop a shell, not by itself, but sand was dense, heavy. If you stacked enough of it in front of the armour, it might absorb some of the impact. Slow the shell down, disrupt its trajectory. Maybe enough that the armour behind it could do its job. Maybe. It wasn't science, it was desperation wearing the mask of logic, but it was something. Hanley grabbed 2 sandbags and carried them back to his tank. His crew was awake now, drinking coffee, checking ammunition counts. They watched him approach with the bags. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Miller, the driver, asked. "Something stupid," Hanley said, "or something that might work." He climbed onto the front hull and laid the sandbags flat against the glacis plate, the sloped armour protecting the driver and bow gunner. The bags sat there, heavy and awkward. He used rope to lash them in place, threading the line through the handles and tying it off to the tow hooks. "You're gonna wreck the suspension," Miller said. "Not if it saves us." Hanley stepped back and studied his work. 2 sandbags, 100 pounds of dirt sitting on the front of a 30-ton tank. It looked ridiculous, improvised, unmilitary, but it was better than nothing. "We need more," Hanley said. For the next 2 hours, Hanley and his crew worked. They hauled sandbags from the engineer depot, 20, 30, 40 bags. They stacked them across the front hull in overlapping layers, roped them together, tied them to every hook and bracket they could find. They welded short lengths of steel rail to the hull to create a frame so the bags wouldn't shift when the tank moved. Other crews stopped to watch. "Command's gonna have your ass for that," someone said. Hanley didn't look up. "Command's not the one getting shot at." By 0700, the front of Hanley's Sherman was covered in sandbags. The hull was invisible beneath a sloped wall of canvas and earth. The added weight, over a ton, settled onto the front suspension, compressing the springs slightly. Miller climbed into the driver's seat and tested the controls. The tank moved forward, sluggish, heavy, but it moved. "She handles like a pig," Miller said through the intercom. "Pigs don't burn," Hanley replied. The loader, a kid from Iowa named Jensen, looked nervous. "What if it doesn't work?" "Then we're no worse off than yesterday." "What if command sees it?" Hanley climbed into the commander's hatch and settled into his seat. He checked his watch. 07:45. 15 minutes until they rolled out. "If we live long enough for command to see it," Hanley said, "then it worked." The engine rumbled. Black exhaust curled into the cold morning air. By dawn, his tank wore a coat of earth. Heavy, ugly, and against every rule. And maybe, just maybe, enough to bring them home. 0803 hours. The column rolled forward. Hanley's Sherman moved with the others, 4 tanks in a loose formation, advancing along a muddy road toward the tree line 800 yards ahead. Infantry followed behind, staying close to the armor, using the tanks as moving cover. The added weight was noticeable. The front suspension groaned under the sandbags. The tank felt nose-heavy, slower to respond when Miller tried to steer. The speedometer showed 18 miles per hour instead of the usual 25. But the engine held. The transmission didn't scream. The tracks kept turning. Hanley scanned the tree line through his periscope. Bare branches, shadows, no movement. The Germans were either gone or waiting. He knew which one it was. "Driver, stay tight on the road," Hanley said into the intercom. "Gunner, watch the left flank. Anything moves, you call it." "Roger," came the replies. The column reached the halfway point, 400 yards to the trees. Still no contact. The other tank commanders were getting optimistic on the radio. Maybe division was right. Maybe the Germans had pulled back during the night. Hanley didn't believe it. 300 yards. The ground on either side of the road was frozen mud and stubble, impossible for tanks to traverse quickly. They were committed now. Forward or nothing. 200 yards. Hanley's hands tightened on the hatch rim. He could feel his pulse in his throat. Every instinct told him to button up, to close the hatch and seal himself inside the armor. But he needed to see. He needed to command. 100 yards. The flash came from a farmhouse window on the left, brief, bright, unmistakable. "Gunner, left building, 2nd floor." The German shell hit before Hanley finished the order. The impact was different. Instead of the sharp crack of steel punching through steel, there was a heavy thud, dull, muffled, like a sledgehammer hitting a mattress. The tank shuddered. The sandbags on the front hull erupted in a spray of dirt and torn canvas. One bag disintegrated completely. 2 others tore open, spilling sand across the glacis plate. But the hull armor held. No penetration, no fire, no screaming, just ringing ears and dust and silence. "Driver, reverse, gunner, target that window." Miller threw the transmission into reverse. The Sherman lurched backward, tracks clawing at the frozen road. The gunner traversed left, found the farmhouse, fired. The 75mm shell punched through the stone wall. The German gun went silent. Hanley's breath came fast and shallow. He looked down at the front hull. The sandbags were shredded, half the stack blown away by the impact. But beneath them, the armor was intact. Scorched, dented slightly, but intact. The shell had hit the sandbags first. The dense earth had disrupted the shell's penetration, slowed it, destabilized it, absorbed just enough energy that when it reached the armor, it couldn't punch through. It wasn't magic. It wasn't invulnerability, but it was survival. "Everyone okay?" Hanley said into the intercom. "Driver okay. Bow gunner okay. Loader okay. Gunner okay. Did that just work?" Hanley stared at the ruined sandbags and the intact armor beneath them. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It worked." No cheer, no celebration, just breathing, just 5 men still alive in a tank that should have burned. The other tanks in the column had scattered during the engagement. Now they regrouped, moving cautiously back onto the road. One of the other commanders called over the radio, "Hanley, you took a hit. You still mobile?" "Affirmative. Front armor's intact." A pause. "How the hell—" "Sandbags," Hanley said. "They work." Another pause. Longer this time. "Say again?" "Sandbags. Stack them on the front hull. They'll stop a shell, or slow it down enough." The radio stayed quiet for several seconds. Hanley could imagine the other commanders looking at his tank, seeing the torn bags and intact armor, doing the math in their heads. Finally, someone said, "You just made that up?" "Yeah. And it worked? We're still here. It wasn't science, it was survival. And it worked." By nightfall, 3 other tanks in the battalion had sandbags on their hulls. Word spread the way it always spread in combat units. Crew to crew, foxhole to foxhole, quietly and without official channels. Hanley's tank had taken a hit and survived. The sandbags worked. That was all anyone needed to hear. Crews raided the engineer depots after dark. They hauled bags back to their tanks and spent hours roping them into place, stacking them in overlapping layers, lashing them to tow hooks and hole brackets. Some crews added spare track links on top of the sandbags for extra weight. Others welded scrap steel into frames to hold the bags more securely. By the next morning, a dozen tanks wore improvised armor. By the following day, 2 dozen. The company commander, the captain from Baltimore, inspected Hanley's tank personally. He walked around it twice, studying the sandbags, the ropes, the welded brackets. He didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, "This isn't authorized, Sergeant." "No, sir. The added weight will strain the suspension, could damage the transmission, could make the tank unmaneuverably slow." "Yes, sir." The captain stared at the torn sandbags from yesterday's hit, then at the intact armor beneath them. "How much weight are we talking about?" "About a ton, sir. Maybe more depending on how many bags you stack." "A ton." The captain shook his head. "Division will have my head if they find out I'm letting this happen." Hanley said nothing. The captain looked at him. "But Division isn't here. And you're still alive." He paused. "Keep doing it. Quietly. Don't make it obvious. And if anyone from headquarters asks, you did it without my knowledge." "Yes, sir." The captain walked away, then stopped and turned back. "Does it actually work, or did you just get lucky?" "Don't know yet, sir. But I'd rather find out with the bags than without them." The captain nodded and kept walking. Not everyone approved. The battalion maintenance officer, a lieutenant who'd studied engineering at Penn State, inspected several modified tanks and filed a formal complaint. His report cited excessive weight, uneven load distribution, and increased mechanical strain. He argued that the modifications would cause more breakdowns than they prevented casualties. "These tanks aren't designed to carry this kind of weight on the front hull," he told anyone who'd listen. "You're going to snap torsion bars. You're going to burn out transmissions. You're going to leave disabled tanks all over France." Some crews listened and removed the sandbags. Most didn't. The argument reached Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, commanding the 37th Tank Battalion. Abrams was a pragmatist, a tanker who'd led from the front since Normandy and trusted his crews more than he trusted regulations. He visited the bivouac area one morning and found half the tanks in his battalion covered in sandbags. "Who started this?" he asked. Hanley stepped forward. "I did, sir." Abrams studied the modifications. "Maintenance says it'll wreck the tanks." "Might, sir." "Ordnance says it's unsafe." "Could be, sir." Abrams looked at Hanley. "But you're doing it anyway." "Yes, sir. Because it works." You know that for certain? My tank took a hit 2 days ago. Shell struck the sandbags. Armor held. Crew's still alive. Abrams was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to the maintenance officer. How many tanks have we lost to mechanical failure this week? 3, sir. And how many to enemy fire? The maintenance officer hesitated. 11, sir. Abrams nodded. Then I'll take my chances with broken suspensions. He looked at Hanley. If it saves them, do it. The order went out that afternoon. Not officially, not in writing. But every company commander in the battalion got the message. Sandbag modifications were authorized at crew discretion. Engineers began testing the theory properly. They measured shell impact angles, calculated energy absorption, analyzed the effectiveness of different sandbag configurations. Their conclusion was cautious. Sandbags provided marginal protection against shaped charges and moderate protection against kinetic penetrators at range. Not a perfect solution, but better than nothing. Belton Y. Cooper, an ordnance officer with the 3rd Armoured Division, documented the modifications in his field reports. He noted that crew morale improved significantly when tankers believed they had better protection, even if the actual effectiveness was debatable. Patton himself weighed in, warning that excessive weight could immobilize tanks in mud. But by then, it didn't matter what command thought. Command saw weight and regulations. The crews saw another chance to come home. The sandbags didn't win the war. They didn't solve the Sherman's fundamental problem. German tanks still had better armor. German guns still had better penetration. American crews still died in numbers that made the casualty reports difficult to read. But the sandbags changed something more important than armor thickness. They proved that survival didn't require permission. When the official channels moved too slowly, when regulations couldn't adapt fast enough, when command was too far from the front to understand what the crews needed, the men found their own solutions. They welded, they stacked, they improvised, and sometimes it kept them alive long enough to fight another day. The practice spread beyond the 4th Armoured Division. By January 1945, tanks across the European theatre wore sandbags, spare tracks, concrete, scrap steel, anything crews could find to add protection. Some modifications worked better than others. Some were abandoned after a few days. But the principle remained: field innovation born from necessity. After the war, the US Army studied the sandbag modifications extensively. The official conclusion was mixed: marginal effectiveness, significant logistical burden, crew morale benefit. But the deeper lesson was institutionalized. Tank development programs began incorporating crew feedback. Field modification requests were expedited. The idea that a sergeant with a welder might see something engineers missed became doctrine. In Korea, tanks wore improvised armor and mine rollers based on crew suggestions. In Vietnam, crews modified helicopters before official programs caught up. In Iraq, up-armoring vehicles began in motor pools, not factories. The lineage traces back to muddy fields in France, to desperate men stacking sandbags on Shermans, to Sergeant William Hanley, and a simple idea born from watching men burn. Not perfect, not approved, but alive. In the mud of Lorraine, one tank stood heavier by 2,000 pounds of sand, and 5 men who lived long enough to tell the story. One crew, one idea, one chance, and sometimes that's all you need.